I've been sitting on this for days, unsure if I even want to share it. But honestly, it's been eating me alive, and I need to let it out. Some people might think I'm cruel for what I did, but I think most of you will understand. It all started on New Year's Eve. My wife, Sarah, and I have been married for 8 years. We met in college, dated for 3 years, and got married in a small ceremony surrounded by family and friends. She was my best friend, at least I thought she was. Over the years, we built what I believed was a strong marriage. We weren't perfect, but who is? I trusted her with my life. That's what makes this even more painful to write. New Year's Eve was supposed to be a magical night. Sarah had been unusually excited, insisting we go all out this year. She wanted to host a big party at our house, inviting all our friends and family. It was out of character for her. She usually preferred quieter celebrations. But I went along with it, thinking she just wanted to kick off the year with a bang. The night started off great. Guests arrived, music played, and laughter filled the house. Sarah was in high spirits, socializing like the perfect hostess. I remember watching her from across the room, admiring how radiant she looked in her silver dress. I felt lucky, blissfully unaware. As the countdown to midnight approached, Sarah disappeared. At first, I didn't think much of it. I assumed she'd gone to freshen up or check on something. But when 10 minutes passed and she hadn't returned, I started to feel uneasy. I searched the house, calling her name, but she was nowhere to be found. And then I saw it. A text notification popped up on her phone, which she had carelessly left on the kitchen counter. The screen displayed just enough to stop my heart. "Can't wait to kiss you at midnight. Meet me upstairs." M. My mind raced. M? Who the hell was M? I felt my chest tighten, a mix of rage and disbelief flooding my system. I knew I had to find her, to confirm what I was already dreading. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at her phone, trying to make sense of it. My pulse pounded in my ears as I clutched the device, fighting the urge to throw it across the room. Instead, I took a deep breath and decided to investigate. If she was doing what I thought, I needed proof, undeniable, irrefutable proof. I moved quietly through the house, my eyes scanning for any sign of her. Guests were laughing and toasting champagne in the living room, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I checked the main floor, nothing. Then I headed upstairs. The second floor was eerily silent, the noise from the party muffled below. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might give me away. I approached our bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. Inside, I could hear muffled voices. One was unmistakably Sarah's. The other, a man's voice, was unfamiliar. I couldn't make out their words, but the tone was enough to confirm my suspicions. My stomach turned as I heard a stifled laugh from Sarah, followed by a hushed, "What if someone hears us?" from the man. The realization hit me like a freight train. My wife, the woman I had trusted more than anyone else in the world, was upstairs with another man during our New Year's Eve party. I stepped back from the door, my hand trembling on the knob. Part of me wanted to burst in, confront them on the spot. But then a darker part of me emerged, a voice in the back of my mind whispering, "No, not yet. This isn't the moment. You can do better than this." And that's when the idea hit me. I wasn't going to let her off the hook with a simple confrontation. I was going to make her regret every single second of her betrayal. But to do that, I had to bide my time. I couldn't bring myself to confront her right then. Not in the heat of the moment. Not in the middle of our friends and family laughing, celebrating, oblivious to the chaos unfolding just upstairs. I had to play this carefully, strategically. If I acted impulsively, I would only give her a chance to weasel her way out of it, to make excuses. No, this had to be big. I had to make sure she couldn't deny the truth, not even to herself. So, I backed away from the door and went downstairs. The whole time, I could hear the laughter and music echoing through the house, and it felt like a cruel joke. How could everything seem so perfect on the surface when inside, my entire world was crashing down? I grabbed a drink, trying to steady my nerves, but nothing could stop the cold, bitter knot in my stomach. I didn't even really drink it. I just needed to hold something, to give my hands something to do. I thought about calling her, sending a message or something, but I quickly realized I couldn't be that weak. I had to hold it together. For now. I watched the clock. Time passed slowly. Midnight was drawing closer, and the people downstairs were getting more and more excited. Every minute that ticked by felt like an eternity, and I couldn't focus on anything else. In my head I replayed everything, the way she had been acting the last few months, the little signs I had ignored. Maybe it was all building up to this. But no matter how many times I tried to make sense of it, one thing was clear: I had to make this hurt. I had to make her feel what she did to me. At around 11:50, Sarah finally came downstairs. She appeared at the top of the staircase, looking disheveled, a little flushed. Her smile was forced, but she quickly plastered on her happy wife mask as she descended into the crowd. I didn't say anything. I didn't even look at her. I kept my eyes fixed on the clock. When the countdown to midnight started, I could feel her standing beside me. I could almost hear her heartbeat, rapid and nervous. Was she guilty? Did she think I knew? Was she waiting for me to confront her in front of everyone? 10, 9, 8. I glanced at her, just for a second. She was already reaching for the champagne flute, eyes darting nervously toward the door, probably hoping Em wouldn't show up to ruin her little charade. I wanted to laugh. The irony was overwhelming. Here she was, trying to act like nothing was wrong when everything was falling apart. But I kept my face neutral. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing any emotion. 7, 6, 5. The room around us erupted in cheers as the countdown neared its end. I could feel my chest tightening, my pulse quickening. My heart wanted revenge, but my mind was still working, calculating. I had one chance to make this unforgettable, to make her pay for what she did. As the clock struck midnight, the room filled with shouts, laughter, and clinking glasses. I turned to Sarah, who was caught up in the moment, her hand raised for a toast. And that's when I did it. I grabbed her arm, not gently, not with love, and pulled her toward the center of the room, in front of everyone. The party went silent almost instantly, the sudden shift in energy palpable. Everyone was staring at us, confused, wondering what was going on. Sarah looked at me with wide eyes, but I wasn't done yet. Everyone, I said, my voice cold, controlled. I need to tell you all something. The room was still. You could have heard a pin drop. And then, in front of all our friends and family, I told them everything. I stood there, in the middle of the living room, holding Sarah's arm, my voice steady but carrying through the silence. I had to make this moment count. I couldn't let it slip by, not after everything I'd uncovered. Sarah, I began, my eyes locking onto hers. You don't get to hide anymore. Not tonight. Not from me, and not from our friends and family. Her face turned pale, but she didn't speak. She just stared at me, eyes wide with panic. The partygoers shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. I could feel their eyes boring into us. I knew what was about to happen would be nothing short of explosive, but I didn't care. I had waited long enough. I know about the man you were with tonight, I said, my voice rising slightly, making sure every word hit its mark. I know you weren't in the bathroom, or checking on the party like you said. I know you were upstairs, kissing another man while I was downstairs, laughing with our friends. I know you've been lying to me for months, and tonight you thought you could just get away with it. Her lips trembled, and I could see the fight or flight response flicker in her eyes. She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off before she could get a word out. The worst part? I know exactly who the guy is, I continued, my voice colder now, almost mechanical. His name is Mark. I saw the text on your phone. You've been seeing him behind my back. And you thought you could pull this off without me knowing. There was a collective gasp from the crowd. Some of our closest friends looked stunned, others in disbelief. I could hear murmurs, people whispering to each other, not knowing whether this was some kind of sick joke or if it was real. But Sarah, she didn't say a word. She just stood there, completely frozen. I could see the panic rising in her. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, her chest heaving as she struggled to breathe. You think I didn't notice, Sarah? You think I couldn't see the little changes? How you started pulling away, how you stopped caring about us, about me? All those late nights at work, all those times you told me you were too tired to talk. It wasn't work, was it? I took a step closer, making sure no one missed a single word. You were out with him. And I let it slide. I told myself I was just being paranoid. But tonight I saw the truth. And now, so does everyone else. At this point, I could feel the weight of all eyes on us. I could almost hear the thoughts racing through their heads. Sarah's parents were at the party, my in-laws. Her mother looked like she was about to faint, her face ashen. Her father's expression was unreadable, but I could see the vein in his neck pulsing, his fists clenched. He must have known something was off with Sarah. He couldn't have been blind to it. I turned to Sarah's mother, who was standing nearby, her mouth agape. You should have known too, Linda, I said, my voice sharp. You should have noticed how distant she became. How she always had an excuse to avoid spending time with us. You didn't want to see it, did you? Her mother didn't reply. She just stood there, shaking her head slowly as if she was in denial, unable to accept the reality of what I was saying. Sarah finally found her voice, but it was weak, almost pleading. Please, no, this isn't what you think. I can explain. Explain? I asked, my eyebrows raising. Explain what? How you've been lying to me for months. How you've been sleeping with him while I've been here, trusting you, loving you. My voice cracked with frustration. Explain how you thought you could get away with it. The room was tense, suffocating. Guests were whispering behind their hands, some of them leaving the room altogether, unable to watch the devastation unfold. The sounds of the party had vanished, replaced only by the rapid beat of my heart and the heavy silence of the moment. Sarah's face was flushed now, her expression shifting from panic to shame. I didn't mean to hurt you, she finally said, her voice trembling. I was confused. Things between us, they weren't the same anymore. I cut her off again. You don't get to make excuses. You had a choice. You chose him. You chose to betray me, and now you're going to own it. I could see her falter. For a moment, she looked like she might collapse. She reached out to grab my arm, her fingers trembling. Please don't do this. We can fix this. We can. And oh, I interrupted, my voice louder now. You don't get to fix this. You had your chance, and you threw it away. The room was silent, but the air was thick with tension. I could feel the eyes of everyone around us, some filled with pity for Sarah, others with shock and disbelief. And then there were those who had a front-row seat to the disintegration of my marriage, and I could see their judgment, their silent accusation in the way they looked at her. Sarah's grip on my arm tightened, and I could see the desperation in her eyes. Please, she repeated, her voice now breaking. I never wanted to hurt you. I was lonely. I didn't mean for it to get so far. Please, can we talk about this privately? I shook her off, my eyes hard. I wasn't going to give her an ounce of mercy. No, I said, the word sharp. We're talking about it right here. You wanted to humiliate me by cheating on me, so now you're going to deal with the consequences in front of everyone. This is who you really are, Sarah. This is the real you. Her face crumpled, the facade she had built so carefully around our relationship starting to fall apart piece by piece. She looked over at her parents, her eyes pleading with them, as though she expected them to step in, to defend her. But her father, usually the strong, silent type, just stood there, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Her mother, on the other hand, looked horrified, as if she couldn't fathom what was happening. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I turned my attention back to Sarah. She was trembling now, her body shaking as she realized that there was no way out, no escape. "You don't get to have a private conversation, Sarah," I said, my voice cold as ice. "You made this choice, and now we're all going to know exactly who you are. No more hiding, no more pretending. I trusted you, and you spat in my face." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't dare speak again. She knew I wouldn't listen to her excuses anymore. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of our friends, family, people who had celebrated with us over the years, who had seen us as the couple to aspire to. It was hard to swallow the bitter reality, the knowledge that they were all witnessing the end of everything I had believed in. They could see the cracks, the lies, the betrayal. And then I noticed something that caught my attention. Mark, the man, he had shown up. He was standing at the edge of the crowd, trying to remain unnoticed. But there was no escaping it. He had been hoping for the opposite, maybe, hoping he could slide in and out of the party without anyone being the wiser. But now, there was no way to avoid the inevitable. I pointed at him across the room, my voice echoing. "There he is, everyone. The man Sarah has been seeing behind my back. Mark, you couldn't even be honest enough to stay away from my home, could you?" Mark's face went white, and I could see the tension in his shoulders as he realized I wasn't going to hold back. He didn't move, though, just stood there awkwardly, looking like a deer caught in headlights. "I should have known it was you," I said, my voice thick with anger. "You always played the good friend card. You always said we were like brothers. And now I see it for what it is. You weren't my friend. You were just waiting for your opportunity to screw me over." Mark opened his mouth to say something, maybe an apology, maybe an excuse, but I didn't give him the chance. "Don't bother," I said, cutting him off. "I'm not here to hear your lies. I'm here to expose the truth." Sarah's eyes flicked between me and Mark, and I could see the realization sink in. She knew she was trapped. There was no way out now. She had been caught red-handed. The tension in the room grew unbearable. Some people were beginning to look uncomfortable, shuffling on their feet. A few guests were leaving quietly, not wanting to be part of the fallout. Some of them were probably taking Sarah's side. After all, she was the charming, beautiful wife they had all known for years. It was easier for them to believe her version of things. But it didn't matter to me anymore. This was about me. About my pain. About taking control of a situation where I had felt powerless for so long. "I've had enough," I said, turning to face Sarah completely. "I don't know how long this has been going on, but it's clear to me now. You never respected me. You never loved me. You just used me, and you used Mark, and probably anyone else who was convenient to you. You made me a fool, and I'm done being your fool." I could see her trying to hold herself together, but the cracks were deep now. Her eyes were red, tears streaming down her face. She opened her mouth to speak again, but I didn't want to hear it. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about me taking back control. "I don't want to hear any more lies, Sarah. You can talk to your parents about it later. You can explain yourself to them. But for now, I want everyone to see who you really are." There was a long silence after that. Everyone was still. But I could see the damage was done. Sarah was broken. And so was I. The room was thick with the weight of what had just unfolded. Guests were scattered around, some with pity in their eyes, others too uncomfortable to look me in the eye. But then, just when I thought the tension couldn't get any worse, something unexpected happened. One of our closest friends, Paul, someone I had known for years, someone who had always been like a brother to me, stepped forward. He had been silent this entire time, watching the train wreck unfold in front of him. But now, he cleared his throat and moved into the center of the room, standing beside me. I had no idea what he was about to say, but I could see that the situation had hit him harder than I expected. Paul and Sarah had always been friendly, but I never thought their relationship went beyond that. Just casual, mutual respect between old friends. In fact, I'd always trusted Paul. But what he said next completely blindsided me. "I need to say something," Paul said, his voice uncharacteristically firm. He turned to Sarah, his eyes narrowing as he spoke. "I've been sitting here, watching all this unfold, and I can't stay silent anymore. I've known about the affair for months." The room fell completely silent. The air seemed to thicken, and Sarah's face drained of color. She looked at Paul like he had just slapped her across the face. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Paul continued, his tone steady. "I didn't want to be the one to tell you, man," he said, looking at me now, his face full of regret. "But I can't just stand here and let her destroy you like this. I should have said something sooner. I should have told you when I found out." I turned to Paul, utterly stunned. My mind was racing. I had always considered him a good friend, a guy I could trust with anything. But now, I was processing what he had just admitted. He had known. For months. And he hadn't said a word. My emotions were swirling: betrayal, confusion, disbelief. Was he helping me now because it was the right thing to do, or because he felt guilty for not speaking up sooner? "Paul," I said, my voice strained. "What do you mean you knew?" He looked down at the floor for a moment, clearly wrestling with his own guilt. When he spoke again, it was clear that this wasn't easy for him. "I saw them together," he said, meeting my gaze. "A few months ago. Sarah and Mark were in a cafe, getting way too cozy. I didn't think much of it at first, but something about the way they were acting, too familiar, too intimate, I knew something was off. So I followed them. I'm sorry, I know that sounds messed up, but I couldn't just ignore it. And after that, I started seeing more signs. I'm sure you noticed too, man. The late nights. The weird phone calls. The distance between you two. I didn't want to ruin your marriage." I was in shock. I was still processing his words when Sarah spoke up, her voice thin with panic. "Paul, please." "No," he cut her off, his eyes hardening. "No more lies. You had your chance to come clean, Sarah. You had your chance to tell him yourself, but you chose to keep him in the dark. You chose to keep deceiving him." For the first time, I saw Sarah falter. The tears that had been streaming down her face now turned to shame, her shoulders sagging as she realized the weight of the situation. Her own best friend, her confidant, her ally in all of this, had just turned on her. She was losing the last shred of support she had left. I took a deep breath, letting the sting of Paul's revelation settle. The betrayal wasn't just mine to bear anymore. It was his too. He had seen the signs, he had known, and yet he hadn't spoken out. Part of me wanted to be angry at him. How could he sit on this for so long? But another part of me understood the complex emotions at play. It wasn't easy to speak out against a close friend, especially when it could ruin someone's life. But now, there was no turning back. "I can't believe you, Paul," I said, my voice raw with a mix of hurt and confusion. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why wait until now?" He looked at me, his face full of regret. "I was trying to protect you. I thought maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed. But when I saw you tonight standing there with Sarah, trying to hold everything together, I knew I couldn't let this go any longer. You deserved to know the truth." Sarah was shaking her head, but it didn't matter anymore. The truth had been exposed. There was no running from it. But I still had one more question. One burning question I needed to ask her. "Why, Sarah? Why did you do it? After everything we've been through, why him? What did he have that I didn't?" I asked, my voice cracking. Her eyes filled with tears again, but there was no answer. No excuse. Just silence. And that was when I realized there was no answer that could justify what she had done. The silence hung between us like a heavy curtain, suffocating everything in its path. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but it wasn't from anger anymore. No, the anger had faded somewhere along the way, leaving a cold, hollow emptiness in its place. I was numb. I had just exposed my wife's betrayal, and in doing so, I had torn apart everything we had built. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about the realization that the woman I thought I knew, the woman I had spent the past 8 years with, was gone. That person no longer existed. And what stood before me wasn't a wife, but a stranger who had lied to me, betrayed me, and crushed everything we had ever stood for. Why? I asked again, my voice quieter this time. Why him, Sarah? What did he offer you that I couldn't? She didn't answer. Her lips quivered, her eyes red from the tears, but there was nothing she could say to make this right. Her silence spoke volumes. She didn't have an explanation, and deep down, I think she knew there was no way to excuse it. I looked around at our friends and family, some of whom were still standing in shock, others unable to look me in the eye. I saw Mark standing off to the side, avoiding my gaze, no doubt wishing he could vanish into thin air. But it was too late. He wasn't going anywhere. I turned back to Sarah. I don't need your reasons. I don't need your apologies. What's done is done. I felt a strange calm wash over me. Maybe it was the years of bottled-up frustration finally coming to the surface, or maybe it was the realization that I had nothing left to lose. But I was done. Done with the lies. Done with the pretending. Done with her. I'm leaving, I said, my voice firm. The room seemed to hold its breath, and Sarah's eyes went wide as if she hadn't expected me to say those words. No, she whispered, her voice cracking. You can't just leave. We can fix this, we can. I held up my hand, silencing her. No, Sarah. There's nothing to fix. This is over. Her face crumpled, and I saw the desperation in her eyes. Please, don't do this. I'll do anything. Please. Just don't leave me. The words were almost too painful to hear. How could she be so selfish? How could she think I would just forgive her after everything? Was she really that out of touch with reality? She had betrayed me in the worst way possible, and now, with everything laid bare, she was still trying to manipulate me with her tears. But I had no sympathy left for her. None. I looked at her, the woman I had once trusted more than anyone in the world, and shook my head slowly. It's too late for that. You made your choices. You chose him over me. Now you have to live with the consequences. For the first time in this entire ordeal, I felt free. It was a strange sensation, almost like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The moment I made the decision to walk away, everything that had been holding me back from confronting the truth started to dissolve. I wasn't trapped anymore. I wasn't living in a lie. I was free. I'm done, Sarah, I said quietly. I want a divorce. And I don't want to see you or him again. Ever. Her face crumpled in horror, but there was no turning back. The reality of what I had just said hit me like a punch to the gut. Divorce. The word felt foreign in my mouth, like a sharp blade, cutting through everything I had known. But there was no other choice. I had to sever this tie completely. I turned toward the door, but before I could leave, I heard her cry out behind me. Please don't go. I love you. I'm so sorry. Please give me a chance. We can fix this. I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I don't believe you anymore, I said, my voice hollow. Goodbye, Sarah. And with that I left. The door slammed behind me, and I stood there for a moment, the world outside feeling like it had shifted. I had walked away from the wreckage, leaving behind a marriage that had once seemed so solid, so unshakable. But now it was just a pile of broken pieces that I couldn't put back together. And for the first time in a long time, I felt oddly peaceful. I had made the decision. I had taken control. And no matter how much pain it caused me, I knew it was the only way forward. The drive back to my apartment was a blur. I didn't turn on the radio, didn't focus on the traffic. My mind was too full of the events of the night, the confrontation, the betrayal, the look in Sarah's eyes as I walked out the door. I thought about all the years we had spent together, the plans, the promises. All of it seemed like a distant memory now. She had shattered that image with one mistake, one series of lies that had snowballed into something unrecognizable. When I arrived at the apartment, I didn't even bother unpacking my things or making myself comfortable. Instead, I sat down at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the wall in front of me. The silence of the space felt oppressive, but it also gave me time to think. I thought about the person I used to be. The man who had trusted Sarah, the man who had put his heart and soul into that marriage. I couldn't recognize him anymore. It felt like he had been someone else, a naive fool who believed in something that didn't exist. I thought about the people at the party, the ones who had witnessed the destruction of my life. What did they think of me now? Did they pity me? Did they wonder if I was overreacting? Did they think I would somehow come crawling back to Sarah, begging for forgiveness? The truth was, I didn't care what they thought. I was done caring about what anyone thought. This wasn't about them. This was about me reclaiming my life. But then, something unexpected happened. There was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. It was late, well past midnight, and most of my friends knew not to show up uninvited. But when I opened the door, I wasn't prepared for who was standing there. It was Paul. My mind raced. I hadn't heard from him since the party, and the last words I had spoken to him were ones of disbelief and frustration. How could he stand by and watch all that unfold? How could he keep the truth from me for so long? I didn't know if I was angry, confused, or just exhausted. He was standing there, hands shoved in his pockets, eyes downcast. He looked smaller somehow, like a man who had made a huge mistake and wasn't sure how to fix it. "Paul," I said, almost incredulously. "What are you doing here?" He looked up, and I saw a mix of guilt and regret in his eyes. "I needed to talk to you," he said quietly. "I know I screwed up, man. I should have said something earlier. I should have told you what I knew. But I didn't know how to break that to you. I was afraid of ruining everything, of losing both of you as friends. I was trying to protect you." I shook my head, the anger welling up in my chest again. "By lying to me? By letting me keep living a lie?" "I know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know I messed up. And I get it if you hate me for it. But I'm here to say I'm sorry. I should have told you the truth, and I didn't. I'm sorry, man." For a moment I just stood there, staring at him. I wasn't sure if I should let him in, if I should even listen to him. But the pain in his eyes stopped me from slamming the door in his face. "Come in," I finally said, stepping aside. "Let's talk." We both sat down at the kitchen table, the same space where I had sat only hours before, trying to process everything. The weight of the night hung over us, but now it felt like the air was thinner. Paul wasn't just a witness to my pain anymore. He was part of it, and I wasn't sure what to make of that. "I don't know what to do with all this," I admitted. "I thought I knew her. I thought we had something real. And then it turns out, everything was just smoke and mirrors." Paul nodded, looking as though he had felt the same thing when he realized the truth. "It's never easy, man. Betrayal like that, it changes everything. But listen, you're not alone in this. I'm still your friend. I know I messed up, but I'm here now, okay? You don't have to go through this alone." I looked at him for a long moment, my emotions a chaotic storm inside me. Anger, hurt, disappointment, they were all still there, swirling around. But then, somewhere beneath it all, I felt something else. Something that surprised me. I felt gratitude. For all his faults, for all the things he had kept from me, Paul was here now. He wasn't trying to justify his actions. He was simply showing up, apologizing, and offering his support. And in that moment I realized that I wasn't entirely alone in all of this. Maybe I didn't know where the road ahead would take me, but for the first time since that night, I felt a glimmer of hope. It was strange, but after Paul left that night, I felt a little less burdened. Maybe it was the catharsis of finally hearing someone else say they understood, maybe it was the relief of having a friend who hadn't completely abandoned me. But I knew that I wasn't anywhere close to being done with this emotional roller coaster. I had just taken a first step, but the road ahead was still full of shadows and sharp turns. The next few days were a blur. I didn't talk to Sarah. I didn't call anyone. I didn't want to hear their opinions, didn't want to explain myself, didn't want to listen to anyone who had anything to say about my marriage or my decision. I didn't even feel like going to work. Everything felt hollow, like a life I used to live, but wasn't sure I could go back to. What got me through was the sheer weight of the decision I'd made. It wasn't easy, not by any means. There were moments when I would hear a song we used to listen to together or see something in a store that I knew Sarah would love, and the old ache would hit me again, deep and raw. But in the pit of all that emotional mess, I also felt a quiet certainty creeping in. A certainty that I wasn't the one who had destroyed everything. That I wasn't the one who had chosen to lie. That I wasn't the one who had betrayed the trust of the person I loved most. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Then, just when I was beginning to think that I could navigate the days ahead, Sarah showed up at my apartment. It was late in the evening, just as I was beginning to wind down for the night. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, when I heard a knock at the door. I stood up slowly, my heart rate picking up. My first instinct was to ignore it, to just pretend like I wasn't there. But something in me couldn't do it. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was the lingering part of me that was still holding on to the faint hope that she might offer something, an explanation, a change of heart, something to make sense of the devastation she had caused. I opened the door, and there she was, Sarah, standing in front of me with a look in her eyes that was a mixture of desperation and shame. She had obviously been crying, her face pale and drawn. "Please," she said before I could say anything. "Can we talk? Just for a few minutes. I need you to hear me out. I can't just leave it like this." I was silent for a moment, my hand still on the doorknob. I was tired of hearing apologies. Tired of hearing her plead with me when everything she had done had already said everything. But then, something shifted. Maybe it was the exhaustion, maybe it was the fact that I couldn't avoid her forever, but I stepped aside and motioned for her to come in. 5 minutes, I said curtly, my voice colder than I intended. "That's all you get." She nodded, stepping in, her body trembling slightly as she looked around. The apartment was quiet, almost too quiet, and I could see her eyes scanning the space like she was trying to make sense of it all. Maybe she was wondering how everything had changed in such a short time. We sat down on opposite ends of the couch, an unspoken distance between us that felt like a vast chasm. She took a deep breath before speaking, her voice shaky. "I've made a mess of everything, I know that," she began, her words trembling. "And I know I don't deserve a chance to explain myself, but I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. That's the truth. The affair wasn't about you. It wasn't about anything you did wrong." She paused, as if she were searching for the right words. "It was about me. About things in my own life I didn't know how to deal with. I lost myself somewhere along the way." I was silent, letting her speak, but my mind was already made up. The words were hollow now. The pain she had caused me had created a barrier I couldn't cross. I didn't know if I could ever look at her the same way again. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," she said, her voice barely audible. "I don't even know if you could ever forgive me. But I'm so sorry. So sorry. I ruined everything. I ruined us." Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked so broken that for a moment, a tiny part of me, just a tiny part, wondered if there was still a chance for us. Maybe this was the moment where she finally came clean, finally admitted everything, and we could rebuild. But then I remembered everything. The lies. The betrayal. The months of being kept in the dark, the trust that was shattered in one moment. "You ruined us, Sarah," I said quietly, the words heavy on my tongue. "And I don't know if you'll ever understand the depth of that. But the truth is, I don't want to try to fix it anymore. I can't. It's not just about you. It's about me, about the person I want to be moving forward. And that person doesn't have space for someone who could do this to me." Her face crumpled, the tears coming faster now. But I didn't reach out. I couldn't. It was over. There was no going back. "I want a divorce," I said, my voice finally breaking through the storm of emotions. I'm done. This is done. For the first time in years, I felt like I had finally made peace with something. The truth hurt, it always does, but it also freed me. There would be no more wondering, no more doubt. It was the final step in closing a chapter of my life I didn't even recognize anymore. I don't hate you, Sarah, I said softly, my eyes locking with hers. But I don't love you either. Not like I used to. I don't even know who you are anymore. And that's something I can't come back from. She didn't say anything after that. She just stood up slowly, wiped her eyes, and walked out of my apartment without another word. And just like that, everything changed. It's been a month since I saw Sarah that night, and if I'm being honest, I'm still processing everything. The divorce paperwork is in progress, and I've been trying to rebuild my life from the wreckage of what I thought was a happy marriage. But in a strange way, I've been feeling lighter. More myself than I have in years. It's not the relief of getting back at her, but the relief of finally releasing something toxic. Something that was never really what it appeared to be. But as it turns out, life had one last, cruel twist to throw at me. It started with a phone call. I was at work, distracted by an email when my phone rang. The number wasn't one I recognized, but I answered anyway. Hello? Is this Mike Davis? A woman's voice asked. It was soft, polite, but there was an edge to it that made me tense up. Yeah, who is this? I'm Detective Harris, from the police department. I need to speak with you about a matter involving your ex-wife, Sarah. My heart dropped into my stomach. I hadn't heard from Sarah in weeks. I thought she'd given up on trying to salvage anything between us. What was this? What could the police want with me? Ex-wife? I repeated, trying to process the words. What's this about? I'm afraid there's been a situation. I don't have all the details, but it's important that you come down to the station. It's about Sarah. I didn't hesitate. Something in her voice, something cold and professional, made it clear that this wasn't some minor issue. It wasn't some misunderstanding. I told her I'd be there in an hour, and the whole time, I was fighting the rising tide of panic. Was she in trouble? Had something happened to her? What could this possibly be about? I arrived at the station, and the second I stepped into the cold, sterile lobby, I felt that familiar knot of dread tighten in my chest. Detective Harris greeted me and led me down a narrow hallway, her footsteps echoing in the otherwise quiet space. Mr. Davis, she said as we entered a small conference room. Please have a seat. I sat down, my mind racing. The walls around me seemed to close in as I waited for her to explain. She sat across from me, folding her hands on the table. Is this about Sarah? I asked, my voice trembling despite myself. Where is she? The detective paused, her gaze flickering for a moment, as though weighing how to approach what she was about to say. There's something you need to know, she began. A few weeks ago, after you and your wife separated, she was involved in something. Something that, as we now understand, has serious consequences. My head was spinning. What are you talking about? Sarah's not involved in anything, she's just dealing with the divorce. Detective Harris shook her head. It's not that simple. We've uncovered evidence that links Sarah to a financial scam, a large one. And she's not just an unwitting participant. She was a central figure in it. My heart stopped. What was she talking about? My mind immediately flashed back to all the strange moments I had brushed off, her growing distance, her secrecy, the nights when she would come home later than expected. But I never imagined it would be something like this. A scam? I whispered, almost unable to believe the words. What kind of scam? It's been running for several years now, the detective continued. A series of fraudulent investments, fake companies, and money laundering. We've connected her to a man named Mark Evans. Mark. The name hit me like a slap. My mind scrambled. The affair, the lies, the betrayal, it wasn't just personal. It was criminal. Mark was involved in this, I said, my voice barely audible. Yes, she confirmed. We've traced a large sum of money that was funneled through Sarah's accounts. She was the one facilitating the transactions, keeping it hidden from authorities. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was drowning in this new layer of betrayal. Sarah hadn't just lied to me, hadn't just cheated on me. She had been living an entirely different life. One that I knew nothing about. And that life had consequences far beyond the collapse of our marriage. And now? I asked, my voice shaking. What happens now? We're gathering more evidence, Detective Harris replied, her eyes sharp and calculating. But Sarah is already on the run. We don't know where she is yet, but we're actively looking for her. I just sat there in stunned silence, trying to process it all. My ex-wife, the woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted, had been part of something so dark, so deeply fraudulent, that it was now a criminal investigation. And worse still, she was a fugitive. She had disappeared, leaving me, once again, the last person to know. You'll need to be available for further questioning, Detective Harris added, her voice professional, but I could tell she was waiting for me to digest what had just been revealed. But for now, Mr. Davis, it's important that you know, you were right about Sarah. She wasn't the person you thought she was. The shock was overwhelming, but there was something else, too. Something that I couldn't ignore. The weight of the betrayal had just shifted. It wasn't just about love and broken trust anymore. It was about something much darker. Something I couldn't have predicted in a million years. I left the station that night in a daze, my mind racing with the new reality that had just been thrust upon me. Sarah was gone. And she had been living a double life. One that had brought her into a world of deception and crime. The person I had loved, the person I thought I knew, had been a stranger all along. But there was one thing that kept echoing in my mind, over and over again: I had escaped. I had walked away from her, from the lies, from everything she had built around me. And for the first time, I realized, this wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the end of the illusion that had held me captive for so long. And somehow, as crazy as it sounded, I felt free.